Well, hello, Angela. It is my pleasure to introduce you to the Moms of Master Books. Many of them have already listened to some of your talks, and I'm excited today. We get to discuss a little bit about you and a little bit about the books that you have authored.
Yay.
So, yeah, let's start right off. Let's just jump right in there.
Okay.
Um, so I'm gonna just share a little bit about how I came to know you. So many years ago, I don't want to reveal how many exactly.
Many, many moons, many moons.
Yes, when I was homeschooling my older children, I had the pleasure of using one of your books in the America Story series, but it did not look exactly like it does today.
Oh no,
But
nothing like it.
I gotta tell you, I just loved your heart in that book. And I read it and I just fell in love with you as a person. And I didn't even know you then. And I just thought this author gets it. She's got a knack. She knows what's important, and it's the heart things that are important.
Mhm.
And so that was my first introduction. And I saw your picture in the book and I just knew someday I'm going to meet this person. I'm going to know this. I don't know. It was just a God thing. He knew. He knew.
Mhm.
So anyway, fast forward and I'm sitting in a boardroom with Tim and Randy and a bunch of the others, and we're all discussing where we want to go, different curriculum lines that we needed, and
Mhm.
we were discussing math and history and all sorts of things. And I had in the past we had considered your books,
Mhm.
but the timing was perfect, and so I brought it up again, and Tim said to Randy, "Why don't you contact her?" And so he did, and the rest is history. And we are so excited to have all of your curriculum, or the three lines anyway of your curriculum, the math and the two history series, as part of the Master Books family. And it's just been such a blessing. So that's how I came to know Angela Odell.
Mhm.
I would like to know a little bit more about you. I'd like the our audience to get to learn more about you so that they can grow to love you like I do. So tell me a little bit about your homeschool story.
Well, we just finished. Uh, Anyway, I'm just adjusting to this fact that I am not going to be starting school at the end of August or early September like usual. I'm not really sure how I feel about that because it's 22 years and we've graduated all four of our kids. And yeah, it's just a crazy thought. I'm one of those people who have closets full. I'm going to be really honest, Kristen. I have never thrown away anything that my kids made in school. So we literally have a closet that is about 6 feet long and it's stacked all the way to the ceiling with boxes and boxes and tubs of everything that my kids have done. And that's because homeschooling has been such a huge part of my life and just a huge healing in my own life. I mean, I believe that God um, homeschools us as we homeschool our children. And that is just something that I will stick to till the day I die. I've heard parents say, no, no, I'm good. I'm educating my children. And I'm like, no, whether you realize it or not, God is homeschooling you. And that's what's something that really needs to be understood, that we are all on this journey together, our kids
Absolutely.
and us.
And we have learned so much alongside our kids. I mean, it's amazing how God uses us. I mean, iron sharpens iron, and we usually put that in context of adults, but scripture doesn't qualify it like that.
No, no. It has been just an amazing journey. And I know that God is continuing to grow me in other directions and I will grow to meet those parameters. But it is definitely a bittersweet um, time in my life, really, of handing that last diploma to that last child. It's like, how does time go that fast? You
And
know,
homeschooling is such a lifestyle.
is it
Yeah.
is. It's
And
not school
so,
at home. It's school wrapped in life. That's the only
yeah,
way I can put it. It's
yes.
part of life. It's a lifestyle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you get into homeschooling? What's, like people just don't just one day wake up and say, okay, I'm going to homeschool.
Well, I know I certainly did not. I had dreams of, you know, really, really silly dreams, honestly, looking back on it. But I'm going to be honest. I had dreams of someday putting my beautifully, darlingly dressed children on cute school buses, and they would come home with all these beautiful stories of the time they spent learning. And it was like a bucket of cold water in the face when, well, we enrolled our oldest in school, and he came home miserable.
Mm,
And it was a disaster right from the get-go. It was a disaster. And this child dealt with some severe um, learning delays. And I was told he had a reaction to some vaccinations when he was 22 months, and he sustained some permanent brain damage. And I'm not going to say permanent, but it definitely permanently marked his life and our journey as a family. It definitely did that. And I was told that he was never going to learn to read because the language processing center had been damaged and the neural pathways were destroyed. And he basically could not transfer anything language related, which the whole world is language related. Um,
right,
he
right.
couldn't remember anything from one day to the next, and it would take him 10 times longer. And really, what they were telling me was he is not going to learn to read on our schedule. Therefore, he is not going to learn to read. We need to find an alternative path for him. And of course, you know me, that was kind of like waving a red flag in front of a bull saying, you're not going to do, oh, you want to watch me? You just stand right there and watch me. And it took us a long time, almost 5 years, to teach him to read. Phonics repeated over and over and over and over. So many times I lost count. But again, God homeschooling me, teaching me patience, teaching me to rely on him, teaching me to ask him for wisdom. And it took as long for me to learn that as it did for him to learn to read. And then we had to deal with the comprehension part of it. Anyway, that was really the kickoff of our homeschooling adventure. It was
And what
wonderful.
and even though it started with so much hardship, the Lord used that to
Yeah,
teach and grow you and teach and grow
absolutely.
your children and to bring you into this lifestyle
Yep,
and this way of the Lord just directing your steps that
absolutely.
has completely changed not only the course of your family, but
Mm,
the course of many families.
I know. I
And
know.
that's
That's
so
a miracle.
amazing.
That's a miracle. Only God can do that. Only God can do that.
Only God, only God. Yeah.
It's amazing. And I am so thankful. There have been times people have asked me, well, would you change your past? Would you change your own childhood? Would you change the way you were thrown into this whole homeschooling thing? And my answer is no. No, I would not, because it set me on the course of learning who God is and how he sees me and what he has placed on my life as a calling. And I
Right.
would not have those connections to that deeper part of who God is if I didn't experience that depth of despair, really, that I desperately needed him. And I still desperately need him.
And that's the encouragement in it all that I always try to remember to look back. The Israelites would set up these stones to remember. And I
Remember
think
the
we all
landmarks.
Yeah, it's always important to look back at those things, not to long for those times,
Right.
but
No.
to remember that when we are in a difficult situation, how God has directed our life in the past
Yep.
that shaped the future, and to know He's doing that
He's
still.
still doing it. He's
He
still doing
is.
it. And he's
Yep,
doing things that we're not even aware of. And
exactly.
the things that we have invested, and I tell people all the time, we're in charge of planting seeds.
Hmm.
But part of that is trusting the Lord of the harvest, because we are in charge of planting seeds. That's
We
what
are.
we must plant those seeds for there to be a harvest. We must do it. But God is the God of the harvest. He's the one who makes it grow. He's the
Yep.
one that sends the rain. He's the one that sends the dryness sometimes that just makes us be like, I need you so much. Well, he does that for our kids too.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's just plain painful to watch that happen.
Yes.
But it's also so important for us to look at our own lives and be like, he did it for me. I know he can do it for them. And
Hmm.
I trust him. I know he's going to come through. So, but we have to plant those seeds. So important.
Do. We do. And that's what I love about your materials is it gives the parent those seeds to plant. It comes alongside the parent, gives them the tools, gives them the things that they can use to plant those seeds, to further the discussions, to have those God-centered talks, you
Right.
know, and God in your materials is just woven through, which is a master books
Mm-hmm.
thing. That's what we're
Right.
known for.
Yeah.
And that's one of the goals that we have, is to show that God is in everything, every area of our life. And that doesn't mean that we just slap a scripture on
No.
and go on our merry little way.
No.
It's actually deeper than that. It's
Yeah.
it's related, it's integrated. He's a
Yeah.
part of it. He's the designer.
Yeah. It is the tone of how it's told. The um, one of the biggest, because I've homeschooled for a long time, 22 years, and you have too. You've homeschooled even longer because you have like twice as many children. But but one of the things that I found frustrating to begin with, when I was homeschooling, and this applied to like all the subjects, a Christian curriculum was just the scripture on the bottom of a page. There's nothing wrong with the scripture on the bottom of the page, but if it doesn't actually permeate the whole method of education, what is the point?
Yeah,
I don't understand what's the difference between the secular mindset and the Christian mindset if it's all it is on a scripture on the bottom of a page.
right.
So it needs to be, for me, very early on in our homeschooling journey, I really realized that the educational model, the educational method that is widely accepted, at least in our country, is really, really deeply flawed. It is so um, focused on a test result that it completely discounts the little individuals going through life. The stuff that we call education is so sad. It's so only addresses the mind of the student. It doesn't take into consideration their heart. It's very secular, really very secular in its very foundations. And so I really started doing a lot of research on the Hebrew model of education, which is outlined in Deuteronomy 6, where it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your mind, and impress this on your children when you're walking and when you're laying down, when you're sitting, and blah, blah, blah. It's basically, if you put that in today's language, it would be God is in everything. Make sure your kids understand that. And so that really became my focus. And I worked with a really dear mentor of mine who just is he is an amazing person. He's a pastor. He's a professor. He's so one of those people that is just like, whoa, let me just take a tiny little drip of your knowledge and it'll be enough for me. But he and I would sit for hours and just talk about how why people, one of the reasons why people are so drawn to Charlotte Mason is because she addresses the child as a whole. Well, that's good to a certain level, but you have to bring in what are you addressing the whole child with? You know what I mean? It has to be
Yeah.
God who is being impressed on the child, not just stuff, not just knowledge, not just learning for the sake of learning, because
Right.
education can become a God. It's not education for
Absolutely.
education's sake. It is the impression of God on our children. So
Absolutely.
it's been just an amazing journey how God has brought people into my life who has they've just opened another little door and been like, hey, have you ever considered this? And I'm like, oh, wow. You just take that, then it just and just watching God just weave it through everything, and it's been so amazing. It is amazing, and Masterbooks getting a hold of my books and being able to perfect them into what we have now has been such a huge. I would have never even um, I would never even have dreamed of asking God to do that. I would not even have thought it.
He's been so good. He's been so good. And I know that he planted those seeds many years ago when I saw your heart in those books
Right.
and they matched my heart for education. And I just know he was directing our steps. He was planting those seeds that only he could plant.
Mm.
And I never forgot that moment. I never forgot it. You know, and I've looked at, oh, hundreds, if not thousands of curriculum, both, you know, for my own children and professionally. We owned a curriculum business. You know, I had seen so many books and I don't remember the author of any of them hardly, you know?
Yeah.
And so the fact that I remember that, you know, that that was just a God thing.
Yeah.
And so it's just been an exciting journey to see what the multiple series that you've written has become. So thank you for sharing your a little bit about your homeschool journey. I just have one other question.
Mhm.
You know, Randy always likes to talk about what he would tell his younger self. So what would you tell your younger self as a homeschool mom?
Wow. I have this memory of myself at I don't even know how old I was at the time. Um, I was probably 26, and I had three little kids. Um, my oldest two were 6 and 5, and then I had a 2-year-old baby. And I remember I have this memory of locking myself in the bathroom and giving myself a timeout because I was so frustrated and I had allowed the lies of the enemy to really speak into my life. And that was really the tone of my life, was a lot of lies and insecurities. And if I could just go back one time, if I could time travel back to myself as a young mom, I would go in and I would give myself a hug and I would say, God is doing something in you that you are going to be able to pass on to your kids. And so many of us, Kristen, I got to be careful because I'm going to start crying. Um, but so many of us as women and especially as young moms, and you just add to it a million times over when we homeschool, but
Mhm.
we bring such um, weakness to the table, and we expect ourselves to know everything and to be strong and to get it right and to be perfect and to not fail and to do everything that, prove everybody wrong that we can do this and prove it to ourselves too, really. But in reality, it is in those weaknesses that God can actually do the biggest work. He does use our strengths. He really does. I like
Mhm.
to write. I can tell a good story. He's used to that. He's used
Right.
that in a miraculous way. But before he could use that, he had to use my weaknesses. He knew that I had nothing to pull from my own experience. I had nothing to emulate as a mother. I had nothing to give from myself. I mean, nothing. There was nothing there. And I was so insecure. So if I could just go in and look myself in the eye and say, listen, God's doing something in you, and your life is going to be used in a mighty way. So don't give up and don't expect that much of yourself. Yes, do everything you can. Leave it on the field every day. But whatever it is that you can leave on the field, whatever it is, whatever little tiny meager portion that you have, it's enough. It's enough. If you can give it with everything that you have and trust God to do the rest, it's enough. It
Yep.
really, really is. And so
Yep.
that's what I would say to the young mom, and I do say to the young moms who come to me, you have what it takes because God is working through you.
Right. It's
God is
his
the one.
strength. It's
That's
his
right.
strength, especially when we are weak, when we're at that point
Right.
of absolute utter exhaustion
Yep.
that every mom faces, especially with the little ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I have learned that the platform, the greatest platform for his grace and his might and his power to show up in absolutely the most astounding technicolor way is on the platform of my weakness. My weakness
Absolutely.
is the best place for him to be displayed. And it's
Yep.
true in all of our lives.
And it's such an important thing to remember in those moments.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, thank you for sharing from your heart on that. And thank you for telling us a little bit about yourself. We are going to transition now to talking about your curriculum.
Yay!
And so that's always fun. Let's start off with your math lessons for a living education. Can you tell me, why did you write this series? I mean, you had 4 kids and, your life was pretty full.
Mhm.
So why write a math curriculum?
Well, I told you I have the son who has the language processing issues. Well, my oldest daughter, um, just a second, I am going to turn this noise off. Okay, so my oldest daughter, who is, as we all know, extremely artistic and just very, very intelligent all the way around, she really struggled with numbers. And so there was a non-ending parade of math curriculum that would come in the front door. The FedEx guy would deliver it. I would look through it, and within a week, it would be out the back door to the sales. Get rid of it. Don't have room for it. Doesn't work. Kind of thing. That went on long enough to where I built up enough notes of things that I actually liked about them, things that I would use with my children that would actually work. And pretty soon I had notebooks full of math notes. And one day it just dawned on me, I'm like, you know what? I have reached the end of the parade. I have run out of options. So I'm going to write something that my kids can actually use and remember. So I like to say that the prototype for the first 3 books, 3 or 3.5 books of the math lessons, they're on notebook paper, and they are stacked in my closet of things that I never get rid of. But as the years passed, and I'm talking, oh my goodness, 16, 17 years ago, as those years, the several years passed on that, I started seeing kind of this, how it was filling a need in the homeschool market. And I'm like, this is interesting. So
There's
I
nothing
didn't,
like it out there.
no,
Nothing.
no, there really isn't. And so I was like, okay, well, this is cool. So I set it aside again. Like I said, I don't get rid of anything like that. So it's sitting there. A few years passed. I began writing the America Story. That was the America Story 1 was the first book I wrote. And then that a couple of years went by, and someone asked me, do you have any idea of a math curriculum. And I'm like, well, so I started kind of putting it together. I put together the first one, and I was like, maybe this would actually work. I mean, it was still really rough,
Yeah.
but I thought, the storyline is kind of what holds the curriculum together, and it puts the
So
math
let me
concepts.
ask this, because that's a question that I actually had for you.
Mhm.
Why do stories for math? Like that's pretty out of the box, Angela.
Mhm. Like
But
I,
I
yep.
mean, I love it, but why?
Well, speaking of out of the box, as we know, I don't even own a box. So it's kind of like, anyway, no, storylines, there's a really big reason why those are there. My uh, whole thrust is to give students math in context. I always say if your child is asking why they have to learn something, there's something wrong with the method, the model, and the curriculum that you're using. No child should have to ask why they have to learn this. That should be part of their learning. It should be not even something that enters their brain. They should know instinctively, this is why I'm learning this, because right here, it shows me right here how I'm going to use this. And then, and also is really foundationally based in the whole relationship based learning model that I really invest in very heavily. I've done a ton of learning and researching and many courses and classes and certifications on childhood development and brain the effects of trauma and all these kinds of things on children's brains as they grow. And I had really come to the place of understanding that so much of the curriculum that is aimed at really primarily at the younger set, like 8 and younger, is extremely developmentally inappropriate, really, for the kids that age. About 90% of children um, don't even really, their left hemisphere hasn't even really totally come online until they're about 8. They have
I
no place to store it.
I think it's even worse nowadays with technology.
Mm-hmm.
Now that kids are not spending as much time just playing and doing those things that are so crucial, which is why our early education materials really focus on those developmental aspects. So, as much as that was true for all generations, it's especially true for students nowadays.
Yes. Yeah, so that is really, I get a lot of questions on why like 1 and 2, math 1 and 2, and now K is
Mhm.
easier, or as some people like to say, behind. Like, behind what?
Yeah.
Anyway, why? I explain it this way: if you have a child who is even good in math, but yet is not developmentally ready to take in that information and store it correctly, you're really setting them up for failure in the long run. If you
Yes.
allow them and encourage them and facilitate that development in a natural way at their own speed, and give them the information in context, whole fact math, that their brains are not taking in fragments and then trying to figure out where it goes. The left hemisphere is responsible for our brain chatter. So what happens is that, if just in a very simplified synopsis of that, if you keep feeding in a bunch of information that does not make sense to a child, or they're just learning it for rote memory, and that would be all of those math sheets where they're just filling in the blanks, filling in the blanks, filling in the blanks. All of this fragmented information is being sent over to the left side. The left side's doing its very best, working with its limited ability, because it doesn't have a very good storage system yet, because the child hasn't been around long enough to have created any of that, established that very well. So it's literally, if you can imagine, the right and the left side of the brain as two people, and the right side is just taking in information, taking it, and just throwing it at the left. And the left is catching it and trying to shove it in drawers and everything else. Well, eventually the left is going to say, stop it. This subject, math, numbers, everything to do with it is horrible. I hate it and I stink at it.
Everything then shuts down.
Everything shuts down. Their brain's literally telling itself, forget it. I don't like it. I hate it. And then the whole mindset comes in of I can't do it. Yep. And unfortunately, we have parents who deal with this still from their childhood. And then they're operating out of fear with their children and thinking that a rigorous math thing will help their children be better at math than they were. And so it keeps perpetuating. So that's really the reason why that the especially 1 and 2 and now K is developmentally appropriately aimed at children that age, because you can't drink out of a fire hydrant when it's turned full blast in your face. Right. And it has been my experience. If you encourage a child to learn to connect with what they're learning, give it to them in context, help them to make a relationship with it, they are so much more likely to actually be able to, as their development moves forward and as they get older, they are so much better and their mindset is so much better. And they may never love math, but they'll be able to do it. They won't have trained them to turn their minds off.
Yeah, and that's what I love about this series. And I was going to ask you what makes this series so successful, but I think you've just answered that question. You know, it is developmentally appropriate. Mm-hmm. And it presents it in a way that's relational. I love the narration part of it, mm-hmm. where the student has to explain or tell back the information that they've learned. And how often have we heard in life that the best way to learn something is to teach it? And so really it's utilizing, that approach in such a simple, easy to administer way. This isn't a math program that's really difficult for parents to, put into place. Mm-hmm. And it's not horribly time consuming. Right. And so that's part of the beauty of it, is the student is able to learn in a way that's accessible, and the parent isn't overwhelmed with trying to teach it.
Right. Well, and I think it's kind of silly how elementary math has been made into rocket science.
Right.
It's elementary math. We use it all the time. We use it in everyday life. That is the math that we use.
Right.
I get tired of people treating it like it's rocket science. It's not rocket science. It's not rocket science. It really isn't. And it shouldn't be treated that way. And also, another really, really important thing to remember is that children need to be taught that their education is for them. It's not about getting some grade on a test to make their parents happy or to satisfy a state.
Right.
It's them. It's for them. Giving our kids an education at home, facilitating, because you really can't give someone an education. You can facilitate them gaining an education.
But it's their responsibility.
It's their responsibility. It's their education. It's not about making someone else happy. It's about us setting them up to be able to be equipped to do what God wants them to do with their lives. Because I don't know about you, but I don't know the plans that God has had for my kids since he created them. I don't know, because he hasn't let me know, because it's none of my business.
Right. Because it's their journey.
Exactly. So it is my responsibility to plant those seeds, to inspire and equip those children to be ready to step into that calling that he has for them, and to be courageous. And more and more, it is taking, it's going to take our kids being courageous, because we live in a cancel culture. It takes being courageous to know the truth, to live the truth. And those things have to be modeled for them. And so if all we're doing is focusing on preparing them for college, that's all good and well, but you know what? That is not the focus. Jesus said to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and everything else we need is going to be added to that. So in essence, that means get to know God. Who is God? If you know who God is, then you will know who you are, and you will know what he wants you to do with your life. But how can our kids do that when all they're doing is looking at the red marks all over their paper and going, I'm a failure. I just lost, I didn't do this right. Now my mom's mad. You know what I mean? So it's really about helping them and facilitating their growing and gaining the education that they're going to need for their life to fill their own toolboxes.
I want to talk a little bit about the levels.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to approach it a little bit different than many curriculums do. I want to approach it from the fact that God has, as we said, he's got a purpose and a plan for our children.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also designed them as individuals. He gives all of us strengths and weaknesses, and he equips us for the things that he wants us to do for his purposes, his plans, and his glory. And so, at Masterbooks, we really try not to pigeonhole students. And that's why we offer different options. It's why we try to target things that are developmentally appropriate. We also encourage families to place their children properly within the curriculum. And why we don't necessarily like grade levels, it's the language that people understand. And so we have to offer some sort of guidance for grade levels. But I think for both of us, we kind of bristle a little bit at this whole mindset of grade levels because we don't approach that. Let's say, I always say with our reading books, I don't have a kindergarten shelf, a first grade shelf, and so on. I might group my younger books together, my early chapter books together, my advanced ones, but they're not segmented in hard and fast rules. And so I just want to have you explain a little bit about the levels and also how a family would go about placing their student within the math program.
Okay. Well, the levels are skill levels and really developmental levels. And if you look at the back of each of the master books, the math master books is put on the back of it, kind of aimed at kids in this age range, which I really appreciate because those age ranges are definitely more along the line of that developmental. Just the accessibility of the stuff in that book is not going to make sense to the younger ones. So you can have kids. You can have kids who are advanced. Yes, of course.
I feel like it honors the differences in the developmental process between the children.
Right.
Instead of this blanket stair step kind of approach, it allows the homeschool parent to really look at the strengths and weaknesses of the student and place them properly, which is crucial, especially for math. Math and language arts, those are the two areas that proper placement is absolutely crucial.
Right. Well, their skill and developmental they build on each other. So you can't skip anything. It'd be like trying to build a wall with a hole in the middle. It doesn't work. Other subjects like history and science, you can never learn everything there is to know about it. So it's really very open-ended, where the math and the language are skill-based, and you do have to move up through the skills as you move up. So yes, the math being skill level based, it has caused some confusion just because it's very different. But I think parents who get it really understand that their child is not going to be like that mythical average child. That average thing really bothers me. But yes, so it is so important to, like you said, to put the child in the right place. The placement tests are, again, very much different than any other placement tests out there. They're more of a readiness test. Is your child ready for this level? So I've had people ask me, well, they'll say, well, my child just did a level 3 placement test and they got it all right. So that means they're ready for level 4, right? And I'm like, no, actually, those are prerequisite skills to see if your child will be successful in that level. So if your child takes the level 3 test, for example, and you think, well, maybe that they might be ready for 4, go ahead and give them the 4th level test, but be aware that they need to master those things that are on that test to be ready to go into that level. In other words, that is a test to see, to make sure that they have covered everything that they would have covered in the previous levels, so that they are ready to get into that book. It is so important not to allow pride or fear to set the tone of when we give our kids these placement tests, because the numbers on the book are really quite literally marking their place in the series. It's just like if we read a series of books and it is a continuing storyline, we don't jump into level or to the 4th one because we're at a certain age or whatever. That's the same thing as with this math. It is so important. It is so much easier to go back and build on the concepts that a student is very firm in. Let them start where they're firm. Let them put some roots down, get used to the method and the curriculum. Let them kind of get used to just that whole shift in thinking that this series really requires, because this math is based on actually understanding the why behind what we do. There are so many people over the years that I have talked to who are like, they're convinced that their kids are math geniuses. And I'm like, I'm not saying they aren't, but the way to really find out if they're actually understanding what they're doing and not just filling in blanks and monkeying what they've seen over the last 4 years is to actually have them explain to you why they're doing what they're doing.
Right.
And I have seen so many times where parents have come back and said, oh my gosh, I did not realize that they could do this, but they did not understand this simple concept. Or a really big one is place value. Place value is one of those concepts that just builds on itself and builds on itself and builds on itself. And sometimes your kids really get it easy, and then sometimes they don't. And the same child can go back and forth going, I don't know. Oh, yeah, I get it. Oh, maybe not. Yeah, now I get it. No, maybe not. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah, and that brings me to the daily schedule. We like to, remove the friction points. So we like to give some amount of structure to families, but it's okay to go faster or slower than what that daily schedule outlines.
Mhm.
So, if a student is really getting it and they can go quickly through it and they want to, go for it. But
Right.
if you need to take some time to really hone in on something, it's okay to slow down too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My biggest thing is just tell people, just make sure that your child is understanding what they're doing, why
Right.
they're doing what they're doing, and move forward. If they understand and they can explain to you why they're doing it and they get it, move forward. And that's what's so beautiful about skill-based lessons, is that if you do it correctly, don't just hand the child the book and say, fill in the blanks. This is not that kind of math. If you actually use it the way it's meant to be used, you will always know what your child knows.
Right.
You
And
will never ask.
they will be well prepared to go into principles of math and then going in beyond that into high school. So it really does prepare them with a strong foundation.
Mhm.
Now, we have 2 extra resources for parents. Can you just quickly tell us a little bit about the Teaching Companion and Practice Makes Perfect?
Sure. The teaching companion is really just a a very handy little synopsis book. It goes through the method, the heart behind it. I introduce myself a little bit, give a little bit of encouragement. I give some teaching tips on some of those potential friction points like place value and memorization and all of those things that, I remember being about when my kids were little. It also has a story synopsis for the entire series. It has every recipe plus some that are just mentioned in the books, but I actually put them in. Uh,
Nice.
the placement tests are in the back along with the answers to those. There's just kind of a conglomeration of just really helpful content in that. Just a nice thing to have on the shelf.
Right. And it covers all. So you just buy one teaching companion and it covers all the levels.
Oh, and there's a scope and sequence, a complete scope and sequence of the entire series. So that's really helpful. And memorization by lesson, like
Okay.
which facts the students are going to be working on.
Yeah, we've had a lot of good feedback. Parents really enjoy that. And then we have the practice makes perfect. How would a family use the practice makes perfect? Now, those are under development. We
Mhm.
have levels 1 and 2 that are available now.
And three. Yep,
And
1 through 3. Yep,
okay. And then 4 right now
being
is
developed.
in
Yep.
process. Yeah. And we're going to have those available through level 6.
Hmm.
So how would you recommend family use those?
Well, I am finding that it's kind of interesting because when we first started them, I was like, okay, some extra practice pages to make it easy on the parents. So that, and that is a really great way to do it because there are some students who need or want a few extra problems for each lesson. There is also some games and different things like that that bring a little bit of a different twist to the concepts. But I'm also finding that moms are, I shouldn't just say moms, because there are dads who are homeschooling too, parents are also using these to kind of be a summer bridge book. If
Yes.
you're starting to homeschool, I've talked to numerous, and this is great because when I first started doing these, I didn't even think about it this way. But there were students being pulled from school and being placed into the series from another curriculum. And so they would be almost ready for one of the levels, but not quite. They had just a few, maybe a couple of concepts that they needed to practice. So these books have been a really great bridge between books. So they would, and there isn't any teaching in them. It's just practice. But a lot of the concepts are simple enough, and the way that it's written into the worksheets and things, it's easy enough to understand how it's being taught. So that
Right.
has really helped fill a need in that way. And that has been really encouraging to see. Really encouraging.
Absolutely. And then we're going to conclude our little discussion here about the math lessons for living education by just touching on the right brain flashcards that we have available as well. Can you just explain a little tiny bit about the science behind the right brain flashcards because they are different than traditional math flashcards?
Right. Well, remember when we were talking about the right brain versus the left brain? The right brain takes in the right hemisphere, I shouldn't say, it's not like we have two brains, but the right hemisphere takes in information in a very collage type way. It takes in, it's all the sensory things, the things that we see, the things that we smell, taste, touch. And it's all of the information that enters our brain comes through that side. And it is a very whole picture. I mean,
Mhm.
when we smell something and we look around and we see a cookie laying on the counter, we know immediately it's the cookie that we smell. It's not like we go, unless there's something wrong with the brain, it knows what it is. It just instinctively knows. Well, it sends it over to the left and it gets filed. It gets put into the memory banks. It gets put in the places that it needs to go. Well, when we have children who are still in that developmental stage of the left side's not real strong, does not have a whole lot of context to pull from, when we hand our kids a fragment, a math concept with the answer missing, the right brain literally takes a picture of that and sends it over to the left. And many, many times it gets filed incorrectly, or it literally gets filed with a blank as the answer. And your brain will seriously pull that picture up, and it's 3 times 5 is blank. And it takes so much work to rewrite it to 3 times 5 is 15 that it's so much easier and so much more effective to actually put it in the correct way to begin with. Our
Right.
brains take from whole and then learn to break it down. The first level of learning is the knowledge taking in, the understanding of a concept. It's bringing it in. And it's only after your brain has actually had time to work with that concept that it can actually get to the point where it is able to take a whole picture, break it up into parts, and then put it back together. It is not down here. We need all of the information to actually be able to learn it correctly to get to that point. So that's kind of the whole, it's a very simplified look at it, but that's really the whole reasoning behind it is whether you're a visual person or an auditory person, it does not matter. If your brain is taking in fragments, that is considered as a whole to your
So
brain.
basically, what we're doing is we're giving children something for the brain to actually remember.
Right.
No,
The whole
so
picture.
the whole picture without any missing parts to it, so
Right.
that when they need to recall what's 3 times 5, they see
They
the
have all
whole
the parts.
thing. 3 times 5 equals 15.
Right.
And so that puts that into the child's brain so that they have it to draw from. If
Mhm.
they don't have that completed picture, then they don't have the
Right.
complete picture to draw from.
Right.
So it aids in memory.
Right. Absolutely. Yep.
Well, great. Thank you so much for discussing the math series. It's just such a fantastic series, and so many children have rediscovered their love for math and the fact that they can actually do it, which is just what is needed. It's perfect for especially it prevents so many problems down the road, and it's also helped kids rediscover their confidence.
Right.
Right there's half the battle with learning math. So thank you so much. We're going to discuss now America's Story. And so we're actually going to talk about not just America's Story, but the World Story series. So let's start with the America's Story. Tell me the heart behind this series.
Well, honestly, the original intent for this series was to give my own youngest daughter an American history storybook. And when I first started writing it, I had no idea God was actually going to bring it to the rest of the homeschool community. And I'm thankful he did. But the heart behind it was me writing the stories for my own daughter. And then somebody asked me along the way if I would make it available for more students and more families. And I was like, I guess so. I guess I could get them printed off and, do that. But one thing led to another. And yes, one of my biggest hopes and dreams is that students will see the whole picture of history and understand God's presence in it. I always tell kids and parents that history is really the study of the human segment of God's story.
Mm-hmm.
God exists way outside. He's not confined to our time. He's always been, he always will be. And when he sees history, he sees it as a segment in front of him. It's an important segment, but it's still just a segment. So when you picture yourself as a dot on the line of that little segment, and you can see that God is in the future, he's in the past as we see it, it's almost like a treasure hunt of being able to see the people that he used to accomplish what he wanted. And what's really cool is that, and this is true about American history and world history, is that he uses whomever he wants. They
Because
do
he's
not
that.
have to be perfect.
Yep.
And he has, and he always will just use whomever he wants. And he decides because he can see their heart and he sees what he can do. So that's really one of my biggest things. And I also really wanted kids to understand the true founding of our country. I have a very large library of very old books, and you have gotten to see them. Your nose was going because of all of the dusty and oldness of them. But it just it just has been such a great it's kind of like a treasure hunt for me, because I can go digging through them if I really want to know about someone, literally in their own words. The majority of it I can go and read. So that has been really, really fun to.
Yeah, that's a treasure.
Mhm.
So, what's your approach to teaching young students about history? It is story based,
Mhm.
and I love that about it. So, it really engages the student. But there's also, not, we're dealing with humans. And so, there's wonderful things and not so wonderful things. So, how do you go about deciding, what topics are going to be covered and how they're going to be covered? And what things are important? I mean, I know this is a big question and
Yeah.
we don't have a lot of time, but how just tell us about how you made those decisions and what your approach is.
A lot of prayer.
Hmm.
A lot of prayer. I There are so many issues: slavery and modern age abortion, and all of these things that are just overwhelming,
Hmm.
overwhelming to adults, let alone children.
Right.
My whole thrust is for children who are the age of the ones doing America's Story. I wanted them to not get stuck in the the um, the sin and the pain and the injustice of all of the human events of history. There
Well,
are so many things. Ooh,
yeah, and children this age really cannot process all of that. Though those require higher level thinking skills that students that age just do not possess. And
no,
so those things really need to be handled delicately. And students this age also develop at different rates. And so I know that there's a lot of students that if you talked about some of the really raw ugliness, it would literally give them nightmares. Other
mhm,
students would be fine with it,
right,
and they would be able to think it through. I have one of those thinkers that
mhm,
is just, I mean, he's been able to read some very advanced things and he makes those connections. Like,
right,
I don't even tell him, and he's telling me, oh, this is what the author was trying to say, and I'm blown away by it. But
right,
there's other kids, there's no way, it would overwhelm them and destroy their little hearts. And
right,
so I love the way you struck the balance in presenting some of these things,
mhm,
but yet leaving other things out so that families can decide what they want to focus on, how deeply they want to go, and they can relate it to their own stories. And
right,
so I do love how you did that. That's what drew me to the series in the first place.
yeah. Well, my heart is for the children. I
Hmm.
don't ever want to be someone who lies to kids just to make their life better, but I don't want to be the person who destroys their um, hope for the future.
Right,
I don't even pretend to know all of the nuances and the complexities of history and the ways of looking at things. I have
right.
read so many. I mean, just for example, Christopher Columbus. I have read so many accounts, varying worldviews, and all of these um, facts, hard facts about Christopher Columbus. Was the guy a jerk? I have no idea. I never met
Right.
him. My point is that the things that we know he did for a fact, I can tell that to the students in a way that will make them say, hey, I'd like to know more about Christopher Columbus. And when they get a little bit older, they can go read with their parents' supervision, and they can discuss the things that everybody thinks and says about this one man who is so controversial in history.
Right.
So
And that's just one little,
tiny
yeah,
little fragment, tiny little
right.
fragment. Some of the things that I will not sugarcoat, I do teach it in a way that I hope takes the student by the hand and says, these things make God's heart so sad and angry. Slavery.
Mhm.
I'm not going to tell the kids that, well, it wasn't that bad. It was bad. It
Right.
nearly destroyed our country. But it needs to be done in a way, and I hope I struck that balance of being able to say, this makes me so sad to have to tell you this,
Right.
because these things should not have happened here in our country,
Right.
because it was founded to be a country for all people to come and be free. And
Mhm.
yet there were those who were shackled and sold as animals among us. And our
Right.
country was built on those backs. And our country was built on the backs of those children who worked in factories. And
Right.
it's so sad that this happened. What can we do not to ever keep anything like this from happening again? But it is happening again. It is happening again with the abortion industry and all the billions of dollars made. And these
Yeah.
are the things that you can't cushion the kids from, but you can say, I know this makes you sad and I'm here for you, and talk to them about it.
And presenting it in a developmentally appropriate
Right.
manner and
Absolutely.
leaving some of it to the parents to help
Parents.
filter
Yep.
and to have
Right.
these discussions.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
So we get some questions about this series. Things like, where should I place my student? Can I use it with more than one student? And if so, how? We have to wrap this segment up,
Mhm.
but can you just discuss a little bit about those things?
Sure. With America's Story, well, and with World Story, you can really start wherever you want. If you're coming into it from another curriculum, if you have the time, I would say read them all, because they are one big history. They're all one story. Each series is a complete story in itself. But you can jump in. If you have a student who just loves George Washington, start with number one. If you have one who's just enthralled with the Civil War, do number two. It really, they're very standalone. And you can use them with more than one student at one grade level or skill level or anything. I've heard many stories of families successfully using these as a family learning experience, where they have all the way from like their 5-year-old up through their high schoolers, and it can definitely be done. It's really a tool that I very much designed for real life people. These are not like your grade level textbooks that are going to be repeated every year, just a little bit differently. These are they're written in a living book style. They're a story, and they are meant to be used with a wide variety of ages and learning styles. They're flexible. You can use them really any way you want.
And we also have the extra timeline materials, which
Right.
really help with multi-age level learning, because you can create those timelines and the students can, each have their own, or you can have a family display. And so we do have a lot of extra resources that
Mhm.
helps with that. And there are narration breaks, which is another tool that works really well when you're dealing with multiple level children, because you can use the narration questions as they are, but you can also tailor them a little bit for the
Right.
younger students and the older students. And
Right.
you're also going to expect more, obviously, from the older students than the younger students.
Right.
Okay, well, let's go right into World Story. What grade levels is this particular series geared for?
I would not use it with any student under sixth grade, really. I mean, like America's Story, you can use it as a read aloud with the whole family, but it if you're going to have a student do it more independently, I would say sixth grade is really your a good place to start with that. And I honestly, I use them with my high school students in my world history class that I teach at Academy of Tutors. So the content, there is a lot more content between these three books. There's the ancient, the Middle Ages, and the modern. If you put all three of those together, there is a lot more in-depth content in those three books than you're ever going to find in a single volume of an overview of world history. So I encourage people to use them with students who are able to read well and developmentally ready to understand things that are a little bit more intense than the America Story.
Right.
Because they do cover things like the Middle Ages covers the plague. I don't go into graphic details, obviously, but it's there, it's covered,
You have
and
kings knocking off
right,
wives and all sorts of,
big,
more intense type topics.
and there's a lot of wars,
Right.
especially in that modern age one. So there's, the content is just a bit more advanced, and it doesn't definitely that needs to be taken into consideration.
Right. And kids this age, they can start to process things a
Right.
little bit deeper. They can start to make some of those connections, which is
Mhm.
real important when you're dealing with such a big scope of world history.
Right.
Because you have, this is what happened and it caused
All of
this
the
other
others.
thing. And then this led up to this other thing. And if they
Mhm.
don't have that developmental ability, they're really going to miss out
Right.
on learning,
A lot of it can go right over their heads.
right.
Right.
Which is why I love introducing world history at this age
Right.
versus talking about it with the younger set. I
Right.
think that talking a little bit closer to home about American history for the younger students
Mhm.
works. And then following that with the broader scope of world history, where they can apply a little bit more of those
Right.
reasoning and thinking skills.
Right. And
La, la.
and the ancients is very much tied to the Bible. I use the Bible as a spine. So if you can wait until your child is at least sixth grade, you do the Bible readings, that student is going to see, they're going to read most of, or at least parts as it applies to the lessons of the Bible. And they're
Right.
going to see, wait a minute, world history and the Bible, they're the same thing. And they're going to make those connections in a way that a younger student is not going to. So, yeah, definitely sixth grade. I would say no younger.
Right, right. So what do you feel students should learn from this series? What's the big takeaway that you really want the student to come away with by the time they work their way through this series of books?
Yeah. Again, God's hand on history, that's a big thing. But there's a lot of focus on worldview in these volumes that are not as much in the America Story. I really hone in on what kind of worldview is fueling this person's actions, and how did that cause things to change even globally, and then being able to connect the actions, the consequences, the follow up, how it's coming even into today's culture. There's just a major networking in those books of Christian history, church history, people who, again, were used by God, even though they did not confess to be any kind of Christian at all. But just having that in the forefront of, God is all powerful. He's the one that sets kings and rulers on the thrones. He's the one. And
Right.
although we don't understand it all because we're just a tiny speck on the long string of what is human history, it's very important for kids to understand that if we can learn history, all the history in ever known to man, but we're only seeing a tiny fraction of what God sees. So that's one of the main things. The main takeaway would be to learn this, but no, God is so much bigger,
Right.
so much bigger.
Right. He has purposes and plans, and he is directing and still in charge. He's still sitting on the throne, and evil will not be allowed to continue forever.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Angela. I appreciate you discussing this history series. And it's been really a pleasure to have this little talk today. And I think the moms are and dads, the families are really, I know we always go back to that because of the moms and master books, but we know that there's a lot of dads that listen in, and I know for a fact that so many families are blessed by the work that you've done, and I really appreciate it. So, all right, well, you all have a blessed day, and take care.